seems like we're at this point where these topics are being pushed to the front and center of the national conversation. Big push against seed oils.
Yeah.
In recent years, obviously Maha, you have RFK joining Trump's campaign, and Trump is promising to let him come in and really focus on healthcare and the food systems. We've seen people on Capitol Hill in recent weeks just talking about absolute garbage that we're feeding children. And the effects. And I know my wife, I think it's funny when you have kids, like you become hyper conscious of this, and something my wife, that's why she's at local pastures every week, because she really cares what we're feeding the boys. And it is pretty messed up what we've done over the last 2-3 generations in the United States with normalizing this industrial sludge that we're feeding everybody.
I grew up in the 80s. I would regularly, as a snack, my mom would regularly slice off a piece of Velveeta for me to eat. And like we had Hot Pockets and Coke and all this stuff in our house. And I fortunately had my own sort of awakening about nutrition and everything. And it was before the farm, but really my thinking really changed when I started the farm and started producing food, and then started coming into contact with people at farmers markets that were, way ahead of me on this stuff. People like Paul Saladino, and guys like that put out great content talking about what was wrong with the American diet. I mean, it's just a few fundamentals. If you make some tweaks, you're going to see a world of difference there. But with kids, it's tough because, like I said, I grew up eating garbage, like a lot of people in the 80s did, because fat was the enemy.
It didn't stop in the 90s, by the way.
No,
we were eating Fun Dip and all that stuff.
But like, then there's also part of me that's like, I go out with my kids and they want to have a burger and a Coke or a Dr. Pepper. And I'm like, well, I don't want you to never be able to have a Dr. Pepper. But, it's just, I also want them to be mindful of like why that's something that we don't consume every meal. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Anyway.
Yeah, it is like the thinking back to growing up, and you had like 3 different 2-liter bottles of soda in the fridge at a given point in time. It's like, maybe you shouldn't have done that. And that's, I mean, if we're going to solve this, because it is a massive problem, and going back to like cost, that's what I think the American consumer and policymakers need to recognize as well, because you may be buying this quote unquote cheaper, less nutrient dense food, and it may seem like it's cheaper, but actually in the long run, when you factor in health costs, it's way more expensive, sometimes for the individual, but inarguably for the American taxpayer, sort of subsidizing this healthcare system. Yeah,
and it's like, it'll keep you alive, I guess, but people should be thriving, and we need to, I think a direct result of the changes that we want to see in the food system would be lower rates of chronic disease and things like that. It's funny, there's an old rancher that I know that I was talking to that lives out near us, and one year he had a field of hay that was over matured, gotten rained on. It was like way past when you should cut it, and at that point, it's pretty much just fiber. It's like the cows in some cases can burn more calories chewing it than they actually get from it. But his response was, it'll make a turd, and it's like, I'm going to feed it because I have it and it'll make a turd. And it's like, okay. Whereas on our farm, we won't touch stuff like that because I actually need nutrition to go into my cattle so I can produce quality beef. So it's kind of like the same thing. Like you feed your kids a bunch of crap. It's like, yeah, it'll make a turd, but like, what are you going to get out of it? So.
And how do you even produce nutritional cattle? Like, how do you know I was trying to figure out how to frame this question, but like, what are the inputs that lead to quality nutrient dense cattle?
Well, I mean, okay, so in the case I was referring to, I mean, that guy runs a cow calf operation, so he's not selling meat. He's got mama cows and they supplement with processed, grain based cubes, feed, cattle feed. But like for our program, so we're a 100% grass-fed, grass-finished program. So we use no grain in feeding our cattle. And so it's a way less efficient way to put weight on cattle. So to put to give you an example of that, to put it in context, we will achieve about 1,000 pounds live weight, depending on the year and the rainfall and forage quality, usually you can expect at about 24 months of age that I can get a steer to be about 1,000-pound live weight. Mm-hmm. A feedlot can take a calf and achieve, maybe a 1,400 pound live weight at 14 months old or younger. So you think about how much quicker they can do that than I can. And they do that by feeding high calorie, often corn and other grains to those cattle. And it's not just straight corn usually either. It's there's other byproducts. Oh God, I can't remember the name of it, but there's other protein sources and stuff that are sort of, I don't know if synthesized is the right word, but they're obtained by processing other plant ingredients, or sometimes they'll even use like chicken litter from poultry houses and things like that. So they're feeding cheap stuff, and more importantly, like I'm not one to demonize grain finishing cattle if that's what you're into, but to do it with high quality grains, I suppose would be the better option, because what happens is a lot of the massively produced grains in America, soybeans and corn and milo and things like that, are produced in soils that have routinely been sprayed with herbicides and glyphosate in some cases. And those herbicides tie up metals in the soil and make them unavailable to the plant. And so those plants actually are less nutrient dense than if they were grown in a more organic fashion without those inputs. And then those cattle are eating that. And so they're getting less of some of those micronutrients that they need. And so then the meat that you produce off those cattle is therefore less nutrient dense. I don't have lab data for this, and I actually should send some. I'd like to do that actually, but we know fundamentally that that's true.
Yeah. Then not only are they not getting the nutrients, they're sucking up those herbicides and glyphosate.
Yeah, and they're eating. Going back to the grain thing, I mean, they're eating grains which they really aren't evolved to do. So it's not, cattle, bison on the prairie weren't going around seeking out like, corn cobs and shit. I mean, they eat grass. That's what the leaf of the plant is what they're really meant to eat.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating. Again, it feels like we're at a crossroads where I think the zeitgeist is waking up to, we should be more conscious about this. I mean, I can just tell maybe it's the bubble that we're in Austin, but even in my extended family back in Philadelphia, cousins are still or more cognizant of what we're feeding the kids. And and again, going back to like cost, like imagine if we were able to transition to a consumer, what's the word I'm looking for, pattern where people are making the conscious decision to buy more healthy goods, and the goldfish of the world and all the high fructose corn syrup based products just aren't being bought anymore. And you sort of had this shift of capital towards farmers, ranchers like yourself that are actually providing good food.
Right.
What could that do to prices overall and accessibility to this good food?
Yeah. And like, I mean, there's like there's multiple tiers to improving, like consumers improving their own lives by making better decisions at the grocery store. And the first one is like, even if you're like really on a limited budget, just to buy the produce and the meats and not all the packaged shit would be number one. And then to further optimize, it's like, well, what's the quality of the produce and meats that you're getting? Like, could you get better? And now that you're not buying all the packaged, Stouffer's and sodas and all this crap, like maybe you could afford to. Maybe you'd spend a little less or the same amount, but you'd get way more nutritional density per pound of food purchased than you were getting before,
Yeah, and you're less hungry. All that shit makes you hungrier at the end of the day, too, the packaged shit.
Dude, yeah. I mean, I've been eating animal-based for over 3 years now, and it's like, I go to a restaurant and they try to fill you up with French fries and bread. That's the bulk of what you're getting at those places. And so I'm the crazy guy that'll order the double meat portion, and so, but like I can eat a steak or a pound of our caveman blend or ground beef, and that satiates me for forever. Whereas you eat a quarter-pound hamburger with a bunch of fries and stuff, and you're hungry again pretty quick.
Yeah.
Hey, do you still have your Bitcoin on an exchange? Don't hold your Bitcoin on an exchange. Take it into self-custody. If you're looking for an easy way to do that, we have the BitKey. BitKey is Bitcoin made easy to use and hard to lose. Take the first step. Get your Bitcoin off the exchange. Check out the link in the show notes. That'll get you 20% off your BitKey, or use the code TFTC20 at checkout.